Вниз я иду.
I'm sure you've heard all these stories. I mean about evil apartments and haunted houses. I have read a lot of them myself. It is said that behind any evil apartment there is a trail of sinister and inexplicable events that necessarily precede what is described in the story, and sometimes even cause it. If it is true, then apartment number 56 at 278 Lennon Street was some kind of exception to the rule. At one time, when I decided to play detective and began to ask people, Google for answers and leaf through old newspapers in the library, I could not find anything interesting about it. It was built in such and such a year, was put into operation on such and such date. No one hanged themselves in the apartment, no one cut their veins, no one disappeared without a trace, and no one went crazy. There were no psychopaths, cultists, or other sinister personalities living there. Grandmothers in the corner of the yard did not gossip about the apartment. It did not even have any explicit notoriety. The apartment has always been inhabited by quite ordinary people who lived there for a long time. And if they left, it was also for quite ordinary reasons. In short, if the apartment had its own dark mystery, the root cause of the events that I will talk about below, I would not have been able to get to the bottom of it. However, I was always convinced that something was wrong with the apartment. There was something abnormal about it. Something ominous that was hiding in the semi-darkness of dusty little rooms. All the more strange for me was that no one else seemingly noticed that. Of course, years later, when I grew up, I finished school and left our bad neighborhood for another. Almost the same one, by the way. I began to doubt the veracity of my own investigation. Like any child, I could make up something, think out. A few coincidences gave a boost to the childish imagination, and lo and behold, another urban legend was born inside my head. At least that's what I've been thinking lately. But just yesterday, while sorting through old rubbish, I dug up my old diary, sat down to reread it, and my skepticism was thoroughly shaken. I hesitated for a long time before telling this story to you. But in the end, I absolutely do not claim anything, and to be honest, I understood almost nothing. I myself, as it is not difficult to guess, lived next door to apartment number 56. Truth be told, my interest was caused not even by the proximity of the residence, but rather by a very specific incident from early childhood. I was 5 or 6 years old then. I had not yet gone to school, so my mother dragged me everywhere with her. That's why I ended up in the apartment where my mother's friend lived at that time. The women quickly went to gossip in the kitchen, and I was shown out to one of the rooms, where I was left to my own devices. It is interesting that although all subsequent events were completely erased from my memory, I still remember everything that preceded them with amazing accuracy. I remember the tart, naphthalene smell of the room where a Soviet carpet was spread on the floor. I remember a cracked mirror above the sideboard and monumental, yet again, Soviet wall cabinets. Framed black and white photographs. I remember my simple toys, gnawed rubber dinosaurs, with which I messed around on the floor. The games quickly bored me, and with childish curiosity I began to explore the room. I remember how I climbed onto the sideboard and began to open the cabinet doors one by one. The next memory is the pale face of my mother, leaning over me in horror. They say I screamed and struggled in some kind of fit for almost an hour before they could calm me down. Dad came running, an ambulance came, they took me away, and then I don't remember almost anything. Mom later said that they heard such a heart-rending scream from the room that at first she did not even understand that the one screaming was me. I thrashed about on the floor and calmed down only after the doctor injected me with something. There was a terrible scandal. My parents were almost deprived of parental rights, but in the end they didn't find a scratch on me. I turned out to be safe and sound, and the incident was hushed up. It could not be said about my psychological state after that incident. I did not talk for almost a year. Of course, I never remembered what happened or what I saw. By the way, thanks to this incident, I went to school a year later, and then repeated first grade. This means that the apartment had an impact on my entire future and not for the better. However, it's a completely different story. It took me a couple of years to recover, after which the apartment occupied all my thoughts. I began to keep something like a diary in which I wrote down my observations, theories, and events, one way or another connected with it. Much of it are my guesses, some possible coincidences, and minor events that hardly deserve to be mentioned. To be honest, I don't know how much it will be interesting to an outside reader at all, because I won't talk about something obviously terrifying, which is what you usually expect from such stories. That is, there was no such thing as monsters jumping around the apartment, ghosts howling in the closet at night, or someone moving into the apartment just to be found dead later. No, everything happened somehow differently. Therefore, I will simply write a few stories from my diary, which I myself witnessed and which I remember best, without any attempt to explain or connect them with each other. The next incident occurred much later, when an elderly and very intelligent married couple moved into the apartment. I was a schoolboy of about 14 years old, and one day, returning home, I found a frightened neighbor on the porch in only a bathrobe and slippers. She was crying and babbling something incoherent, from which I absolutely could not make out anything, but I immediately understood that the matter was in the apartment. I got a little confused, but I tried to calm her down and even volunteered to see her off, thereby showing that there could be nothing wrong in the apartment while really hoping so myself. We went up to the floor, entered the hallway. The door was not locked. The sun was shining outside the windows. It was daytime, and the apartment looked normal. There was nothing sinister in it. But the woman was really scared, and her panic gradually started to affect me. Over there, son. We went into the hall and she pointed to a small wooden door, which led to another room. Not even a room, but rather a closet without windows, only 3 by 5 meters in size and very dusty. There were children's balls on the floor, some kind of garbage, and there was a table. There was a candlestick on it, very beautiful, but dirty. There were dishes that even looked antique. A light bulb hung on a wire from the ceiling. There was nothing else in the room. It eased my heart. I calmed down and tried to explain to the neighbor that there was no one in the room, and she must have thought something, but she just burst into tears. It turned out that the problem was with the room itself. The woman swore to God and assured me that there had never been any door in this room in her apartment. She discovered it only in the morning, barely looked inside, and ran out into the street. And I could totally understand her. On the table, covered with a centimeter layer of dust, one could clearly see numerous, large and small, and clearly not belonging to an elderly woman, handprints. That same evening, I heard the roar of a perforator and the sounds of moving furniture. The old couple haven't visited the apartment anymore. Heard they were renting it out. I don't know why they didn't just get rid of it completely. Another story that is completely crazy. I only heard it once and am not sure of its authenticity. At one time, the apartment was rented by a lonely 40-year-old man, Konstantin Mikhailich. He was a good man, but was an alcoholic. Well, he lived for some time, and then moved out. A few years later, we met with him in a common company, drank, talked. Given my pathological interest in the ill-fated living space, I could not help but ask him if they heard that the apartment was evil. So how was his life in it? Konstantin Mikhailich was silent for a minute, then he laughed and said,
"Well, yes, after my life in it, I almost stopped drinking, stopped laughing, I almost drank myself to death, to delirium tremens."
And he told me this story. Well, it happened during an excessive drinking binge. For a week I haven't gone sober once, only left my home to get more booze. You know how it goes. And on one of those days, I wake up because someone is stroking my head. I open my eyes and see a huge beetle sitting on the bed next to me, stroking my head and saying, forgive me, forgive me. Why are you staring? It really happened. Of course I was shocked, but not much. I was drunk. It's absurd, but it wasn't the beetle that frightened me, but how it got into my room. Maybe I didn't close the door. I ran out into the corridor, checked, no, everything is fine. I returned to the bedroom. The bug is sitting on the bed. Huge, as tall as a man, black, moving his mandibles, looking at me. This is where I freaked out. Got drunk, I think. I should urgently go to the bar to heal myself, maybe the obsession will end. And so I did. I returned, drank some more, but the beetle did not disappear. He, how should I say it, suddenly climbed into the bag I bought, took out a bottle of something, and drank it. In general, no matter how stupid it sounds, we began to drink together. With the beetle, I mean. We ran in turns for a new booze. First I went to a stall, then he disappeared somewhere and then appeared again. And the conversations began. Again, it sounds stupid, but about the most ordinary things. About politics. About women. I don't know how long it lasted. It seemed to me, you won't believe it, for a couple of days. I must have gone completely insane at the time. I drank non-stop and did not sleep. Moreover, it was strange that no matter how much we thumped, I didn't seem to get drunk. I was getting drunk, of course, but I couldn't get drunk to death and couldn't stop either. Out of the corner of my consciousness I understood that all this was messed up, but still I could not stop all. I was saved by chance. I trudged for the next dose, fell and could no longer get up. Someone called an ambulance, and I woke up in the hospital. Well, sobered up and with a headache, I returned to the apartment for my belongings. I got evicted, and rightly so, and haven't seen the bug. And there were never any bugs at all. Vodka is a terrible thing, brother. Konstantin Mikulich burst out laughing, and he told it all as half a joke. As you can see, all this paranormal happening in the apartment was, albeit creepy, but seemingly harmless. In the end, no one went missing, died, or got hurt. For the most part it was, but not always. And here's another incident for you. It fell during the very renting period of the apartment, when the next tenants arranged a check-in on the apartment. Music blared, swearing sounded, smoke stood like a rocker in the stairwell. Neighbors who tried to stop all this disgrace were sent the fuck, and the police called were in no hurry to come. As it turned out, in vain. At some point, the tired tenants reconciled themselves and simply waited for everything to end by itself. But everything ended in an unexpected way. Somewhere late at night, a heart-rending female scream came from the apartment. With a bad feeling, I went out to the playground, where frightened teenagers, puzzled cops, and neighbors were already crowding. I was invited as a witness, and then I saw everything myself. We went into the room, where a creature huddled in a corner, trembling all over. I shuddered, and only looking closely, I realized that it was not man, but a young woman. Very pale, naked, and all covered with some kind of slime. I don't know what happened, but she had no hair on her head, eyebrows, or eyelashes. There were no ears. There were no fingers or toes, not a single one. There was no blood. The wounds in these places were as if frozen, pale pink meat framing neatly cut pieces of bone. She did not react to anything, staring senselessly at her own stumps, only sobbing softly. Floundering in a transparent slimy puddle. The sight made me sick. The cops quickly came to their senses and began to twist the participants of the failed party. They did not dare to approach the girl. I don't know what happened to her after that, or if she was able to tell anything. For a whole hour of paperwork and other formalities, she did not give out a single coherent phrase, and she was carried out of the apartment on a stretcher. She just mooed and jerked her stumps in the air. A terrible sight. Something terrible happened to her. The apartment punished her. I think so. Of course, I would very much like to know the details of this story, but the authorities took up the matter. And who will report to an 18-year-old student? It is noteworthy that a similar story happened to another man. He kind of woke up one day, missing a couple of fingers on his hand. Again, there was no blood, as if cut off by a laser. What happened, I couldn't say. He shouted, of course, the doctors arrived. True, the story did not end with anything terrible. The man did not seem to understand anything at all. He lived in the apartment for a long time, and, oddly enough, nothing more happened to him at all. Here, as you can see, these are all separate stories, not connected in any way. And no matter how hard I tried, I could not fit these and many other strange incidents into some kind of system. They just happened, to different people, at different times, and each time in a different way. However, there were still some patterns in the behavior of the apartment. I even specifically singled out and listed them in my diary. For example, in the apartment any mechanical clock refused to work. They immediately stopped. This is despite the fact that this did not happen with electronic clocks, on computers and phones. Another apartment, how to say it, periodically liked to lock up. This happened quite often. The owner went somewhere, then returned, inserted the key into the keyhole. But the door did not open. The mechanic called from the nearest housing office usually could not help in any way. The door seemed to grow into the wall, the lock jammed. It could last for several hours. Then, after some next attempt, the lock turned as if nothing had happened and the door opened. I remember that this always confused new tenants, and local locksmiths even got used to it, sometimes refusing to come at all. They say, it will pass by itself. The situation with animals was also strange. There were never any pets in the apartment. They did not take root. Getting into it, the pets began to behave restlessly. The cats ran away. The dogs rushed at everyone. As a result, the owners somehow had to get rid of them. Birds are another matter. Crows, doves, sparrows, they used to hover in a cloud in front of the windows, beating against the panes. Sometimes they also suddenly disappeared, but one way or another they showed some kind of pathological interest in the apartment. I myself many times caught birds rushing around the room, breaking through the window. Why is that? I don't know. And, of course, the piano. Early, very early in the morning and usually in the spring, melancholic piano music was heard from the apartment. It's even one of my earliest memories. As a child, barely awake in the half-light, when the whole house was still asleep, I heard this mournful melody through the wall. It didn't seem strange to me back then. Almost all the neighbors heard it, very many. but no one has been able to identify the source. No one in our house and in our entrance has ever played the piano. Speaking of the piano, another story, perhaps the last. That day I woke up to this oppressive melody and could not sleep. By that time I knew that it had no source, that it oozed directly from the walls. This was disturbing and creepy. I got out of bed, drank coffee, tried to occupy myself with something, but I could not concentrate on anything. I don't know why, but I looked out onto the landing, and to my horror I saw that the door of the apartment was open. At that moment, the most correct decision was to return to my room, cover myself with a blanket, plug my ears and pretend that nothing was happening, because the door of the apartment opened at 4 in the morning did not bode well. I don't know why I went there, but no matter how stupid it sounds, yes, I went there. Straight in the best traditions of shit horror. My eyes gradually got used to the darkness, and I could distinguish the outlines of objects. In the corridor, the music seemed to become louder. It seemed to me that it was coming from the kitchen. With a sinking heart, I crept in there, and then the first oddities began. The kitchen had an ordinary appearance, but it was as if larger. Longer than it should have been. It seemed to me that the end of the room generally extended beyond the perimeter of the house, and I could hardly see it. But I experienced a real shock when I reached the opposite wall. On the side there was a passage, which obviously should not have been here. Passage to the flight of stairs. An ordinary concrete staircase leading upstairs. On the 4th floor it turns out, or I don't know where. Overpowering a strong desire to escape, I slowly and uncertainty, but climbed it, hitting a rather narrow corridor. These were no longer the apartments of the Brezhnev apartment. It had very high ceilings, a long corridor, which in our real world should already be somewhere on the street. At the height of the 4th floor, there was a light at the end of the corridor. On tiptoe, pressed against the wall, I almost crawled along him. And he led me to the room. The source of the music was there. There was also a lamp burning. There I clearly saw some movement. I could not immediately understand what it was. I did not have the courage to come closer and look into the room itself, so I watched from the corridor, seeing only its corner part. The wall of the room was a continuation of the corridor wall. It was along the wall that the piano stood, but no one was sitting behind him. The keys were pressed smoothly and not without some grace by about a dozen long pale shoots, poles that went somewhere deep into the room. They slid deftly from the pedals to the keys, reproducing the same melody that I had heard many times. From the beginning, I thought that this is some kind of mechanical structure that someone controls out there, or it works by itself. But the more he looked, the more clearly he felt the hair on his head stand on end. No, there could be no mistake. They were fingers. I clearly saw long, but quite human nails, folds of skin. The creature fingers, who was somewhere in the back of the room. I don't know how far, and played the piano. At this point, I decided that enough was enough. To hell with all this. From the realization that the passage could close at any moment, and I would be left alone with this, I was seized with horror. I began to back away, and then the music stopped. The fingers froze, squeezing out the last, long and disturbing note from the instrument. At that moment, I understood everything. I understood even before someone's elongated, irregularly shaped face slowly floated out from behind the door frame. I didn't look at him. I turned around and rushed away as fast as I could. Fortunately, the passage was in place, and I will be left alone with this. I was seized with horror. I began to back away, and then the music stopped. The fingers froze, squeezing out the last, long and disturbing note from the instrument. At that moment, I understood everything. I understood even before someone's elongated, irregularly shaped face slowly floated out from behind the door frame. I didn't look at him. I turned around and rushed away as fast as I could. Fortunately, the passage was in place, and I will be left alone with this. I was seized with horror. I began to back away, and then the music stopped. The fingers froze, squeezing out the last, long and disturbing note from the instrument. At that moment, I understood everything. I understood even before someone's elongated, irregularly shaped face slowly floated out from behind the door frame. I didn't look at him. I turned around and rushed away as fast as I could. Fortunately, the passage was in place. That day, I wandered the streets for a long time, unable to force myself not only to return, but even to approach the house. It saw me, and I did not know what the consequences would be. For a long time I slept with the lights on and shied away from every rustle, expecting that the apartment would want to get rid of an unnecessary witness. But absolutely nothing happened. The music continued to play as if nothing had happened in the morning, and every time I heard the piano playing, I tried in vain to drive away the image of terrible fingers clicking on the keys. So why am I even telling you all this? And why did he suddenly start looking for and rereading his teenage diary? The fact is that just the other day I came across an advertisement for the sale of that very apartment. And I think about the fact that I could buy it. Take a loan from a bank or sell what I inherited, I don't care. I agree that it sounds silly, given all that I have just said. I just look at my current life and understand that something significant or even simply interesting will never happen in it. All vivid and truly vivid memories were somehow connected with the apartment. I'm not trying to say that I'm special or that I need more than anyone else. Just in all the time of my research, the only thing I came up with was that the apartment is something like an impossibility. A miracle. Yes, frightening and unpleasant, but still a miracle. And now everyone around is trying hard not to notice this miracle, but I was just afraid of it, hiding behind my diary. After all, who said that miracles have to be sleek and comfortable? Perhaps real miracles are not for people at all. There is also something else. At the beginning, I said that I do not remember what I saw as a 5-year-old child. This is not entirely true. I really don't remember exactly, but at night I have the same dream. It is repeated in different variations, but the essence does not change. In a dream, I go into the apartment, where it is warm and cozy. The lights are on in the rooms, and my long-dead mother and grandmother are sitting in the kitchen. They smile at me, and I smell the familiar smell of pies from my childhood. A kettle boils on the stove, and a piano sounds somewhere above the ceiling, but it doesn't scare me anymore. Now I feel like I'm at home. I exchange a couple of ordinary, meaningless phrases with them and go into the very room from which it all began. Just like in childhood, I stand on the sideboard and open the hinged doors of the cabinets. For a second, I am blinded by a bottomless, amazingly deep darkness. And in this darkness, one by one, the brightest balls of light begin to light up. Stars, thousands of stars. I'm pulled in there, and they move at me at breakneck speed. Pulling back, I fall to the floor of the room and wake up. I don't know what it is, a real memory. Some kind of sign or even a trap. But this time I intend to go all the way. This time I think I won't be afraid.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.